Signore e signori, buonasera. Welcome to New York University Casa Italiana Zerilli Marimò for this evening in which we present on the Zoom platform the new book by Annie Rachele Lanzillotto. For those of you who are friends of the Casa and that are familiar with our space, Annie is a very much cherished presence. She's a powerhouse, along with all the other things that she is, poet, performance artist, author, playwright. And I'm delighted that she accepted to present her book here in the virtual Casa with a dear colleague and friend, Stan Pugliese, an historian from Hofstra University. The only thing I'm missing is the corporeality of Annie's events. The body is at the center. She's made of flesh and blood, and you can see it and you can feel it in the air when she's on the stage. And the other thing is that Annie is a great poet. She has a unique voice that is absolutely hers, but she's also somebody that creates community. And it's so beautiful when we have the events here in person to see the group of people that come with her and each of them motivated to do something for the promotion of Annie Rachele's books. It's a delight. You will hear from her performing. She doesn't read, she performs every time. And I'm looking forward to it. Stan Pugliese told you he's an historian from Hofstra University. His teaching is divided between the history and Italian studies. Stan is an expert in contemporary Italian history, and in particular, the history of intellectuals during fascism. It's a delight, and to me, it's very symbolical also that it's an historian to speak with a poet, to put everything in the right perspective. And I'm asking you to welcome to the screen Annie Rachele Lanzillotto and Stan Pugliese. Annie, I see that you have a meter there. Have you parked? You have to unmute yourself.
I got to feed the meter before I come into Casa. You got money for me? All right, thanks.
There you go.
All right, I got it.
There you go.
Thanks, I owe you, Stefano. I'll give it to you next time I'm in the city.
No problem. Ciao.
Stefano, wait, don't go.
I'm here.
You know, I want to say this is a real homecoming because the last time I was with a crowd of people was March 3rd, 2020, or March 1st at Casa Italiana, for the reading of Luis De Salvo, the book by Vijay Junta and Nancy Caronia. And then that was it. I was in lockdown after that. So this is a real homecoming for me. And
this is your home, è la tua casa.
And un forte abbraccio, a presto.
Ciao.
Okay, ciao, grazie. All right, Stan. So listen, you're the godfather of this book because this would have never existed without your invitation to go to Napoli Città Libro.
So first, let me thank Stefano and the staff at the Casa Italiana for coming back and hosting us this evening. And I just want to say to the audience, those of you that know Annie, she requires no introduction. Those of you who are meeting her for the first time are in for an extraordinary treat. As Stefano mentioned, Annie is a force of nature. She is a poet, a writer, a musician, an activist. She's deeply involved with the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire Coalition Memorial. And to mention someone else, another dearly departed colleague of ours, Annie mentioned Luis De Salvo. I have to mention Francesco Durante, who was also, in a way, the catalyst for this book, because when Francesco Durante called me up a couple of years ago and asked me to bring a couple of Italian-American writers to the book fair that he organized for many years, Napoli Città Libro, my first thought was to bring Annie Lanzillotto to Naples. I figured that would have been an explosively creative combination. And joining us was Peter Covino, who we might have occasion to speak to later this evening. So for the course of the events this evening, Annie's going to read for about 20 minutes, and then I will join her with a Q&A. As Stefano mentioned, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A, not in the chat. And if you would like to ask a question, just raise your hand and the staff of the Casa Italiana will unmute you to ask questions. So I'm going to turn things over to Annie here.
All right, thanks, Stan. See you in a little bit. So this is the new book, What Do You Call the Wind? I don't know how many of you there grew up with the word whaddyacall. If you grew up with the word whaddyacall, put it in the chat, in the Q&A, excuse me, in the Q&A. And, or put in a word you grew up with. This is a word my father used all the time. What do you call? What do you call it? I'm going to meet Whaddyacall to do the whaddyacall. So this word is emblazoned in my psyche. In Italian, it'd be in all different dialects, like some version of Come si chiama. And the book's in 5 sections. And depending on where in Italy we are, you get a version of the regional language, how you say, what do you call the wind? So I want to dedicate this tonight to a few people, Francesco Durante, who we lost, and recently Rosemary Capello, who we lost, and Bob Viscusi, who we lost just before quarantine, and my mentor, Joe Papaleo, who we lost some years back. Writing links you with the dead. You got to write as if you're already dead. You need that freedom. And when writers die, we still talk to each other through our works. So I'm still reading Rosemary, Joe Papaleo, Francesco, Bob Viscusi, and it'll be like that, for the rest of my life. And then I'm leaving a few inches on the shelf. So this is a few inches on the shelf. I'm going to read a couple of sections, and I'll jump in and then talk to Stan. And like he said, put your comments or questions in the Q&A, chat it up in there in the Q&A. And then we'll talk later a bit. Or you could call me after. All right. So in this chapter, I bring my older sister meets me to go to Puglia, to Acquaviva delle Fonti, outside of Body, to meet the last living niece of my parents' generation. The niece of Grandma Rose Marsico Petruzzelli, my grandmother who was born in 1900 in Acquaviva delle Fonti. And this section is kind of an anthem to the diaspora and diasporic communities. Where it came from was when Stan invited me to go to Naples to this literature festival, Napoli Città Libro, City of Books. My sister cried, my aunt cried, who was 95. And it struck me because, lots of my friends go to Europe all the time or other continents, and people aren't in tears. And I was saying, what's everyone crying for? And I held that question, and that question is the spine of the book. Why was everyone crying? What were these tears about? So we go to Acquaviva and we meet Zia Annunziatine, who I had met 20 years before. Zia Annunziatine held each of our hands. She looked right into Rosina's eyes and grabbed the moment, knowing it would never come again. She confided in her as if they'd known each other all their lives. She squeezed our hands with all her might and said over and over, "We thought of you every day. Even if we didn't see you, we thought of you." We all opened up into deep breath sobbing. Zia Annunziatine had kept track of us in her mind and in her prayers. We were linked through the silence and the absence. It was like there were 3 groups of people who were connected for us: the dead, the living, and the relatives overseas. You knew they were there, but you didn't know who they were. Rosina shared her memories of sending packages to Acquaviva delle Fonti, and she remembered as a little girl mailing her communion dress. I was relieved to land in a moment where I could cry without holding back, a moment none of us could fully understand, a moment where we could all cry together, let it all out, all the unspoken, all the grief, all we didn't understand about life. We were each a facet of cut glass, like the crystal that hung in Aunt Grace's window. Together, we completed a picture that had been hidden from all of us. Growing up in the Bronx, Grandma Rose had seemed singular to us, and now she had a context. Rosina could see clearly the people and the place Grandma Rose came from, and suddenly, our little grandmother wasn't singular at all. She was part of something bigger, a culture, a language, a tradition, a town, a land, a whole set of ways. I know Rosina imagined Grandma Rose and Annunziatine together. It was impossible not to enter the past as if you could lift the veil of time and be there yourself. Zia Annunziatine told us this story 3 times to make sure we got it, that we caught the nuance and could take the story away with us back to America. Some stories are adamant to be told and bubble up in a person until they are transmitted and handed off to someone else, to the next generation. We are the keepers of her story now. Annunziatine slowed down her speech pattern and spoke in Italian for us to understand, with a little Acquaviva jumping in, the language of the heart. This is my translation of what she said to us. I understood everything Zia Annunziatine said. I capisce not a word for word, but deeper, the bark and bite, music, phrases, intention, whistling, calling, answering, clapping of hands, slapping the table, sounds, squeezing my hand, saying what you mean, how you mean, what you want, not what you think, bits and bites of words without hesitation, sounds that turn corners, syllables that cut to the chase, expression, pure flow, pura de fluit, the town motto of Acquaviva delle Fonti. Annunziatine cried and squeezed our hands as she told it over and over, speaking the rush of a waterfall. Here's a translation of what she said. When Zia Rosina and Zia Lucia arrived in America in 1919, every month they would send $10. Every month we would wait for the envelope from America. They sent packages too, American clothes. When a package came from America, we would wait to open it until everyone gathered around the room. Neighbors, friends, everybody. Then we opened it. We passed everything around. Everyone marveled at the American style clothing. We never saw such style. My school friends were jealous of my American dresses. I carried my shoes to school to conserve the shoes. Then I would put them on once I got inside the building. My school friends would say, "Look at her in the American dress." And they'd turn the fabric of my dress over in their hands and inside out. They never saw such stitching. Clothes of America, they'd look at the details, the collar, the shape, the trim, the waist belt. I told them, "Sangue me in America, my blood in America." They would examine the style and try to copy it by sewing their own clothes based on what they saw. Times were hard. Sometimes I would ask my mother, "When's the envelope coming from America? Will we make it until then?" We had little to eat, maybe a piece of bread. My mother, Maria, would assure me, "Yes, we will make it, my love." And then a package would arrive from America and everyone would gather around. And then we'd open it. As Zia Annunziatine finished the story, she squeezed my hands and my sister's hands harder and told it again. She wanted to make sure it got through to us. I wondered what style dresses my Grandma Rose would have sent in 1919, 1920, maybe a shirtwaist. Perhaps it was the first time they saw the collars and embellishments and waistlines. Clothes for the working woman, away from the farm, out of the kitchen, out of the fields, into the city. And in the 30s and 40s, when Annunziatine was a schoolgirl, I thought what my grandmother had to do to save $10 in 1919. How'd she do it working in the factories as a seamstress, then as a finisher, taking piecework home to work on late into the night? At one point, my grandmother made beaded combs for the factory. I wonder what these combs looked like. My imagination and memory for things I had no way to remember was on fire, sparking into dark corners with just tips of light as hints of detail. The sparkle in Annunziatine's eyes made it easy to picture her as a little girl, enamored by these magical aunts in America, who she'd never met, but who sent packages and envelopes that enabled them to survive. Then in 1981, at 81 years old, Grandma Rose returned to Acquaviva delle Fonti, 65 years after she'd immigrated. What a reunion that was. Her sister Maria was 85, 1 month together after a lifetime of separation. This is what the tears were for when I left New York. This moment, Aunt Grace's tears, Rosina's tears, Zia Annunziatine's tears, my cousin's tears, Annunziatine's children and grandchildren's tears. All the same tears, tears of the ancestors, all the tears our grandmothers held in, tears of being torn apart, tears of breaking open, tears of return, trying to find each other's shore, tears from birth through death with the force of rivers rushing toward oceans, tears where words crumble in their efforts, tears for silence, tears for holding it all inside, tears for the moon's howl. We cried for our mothers and grandmothers. We cried for everything we would never know about each other and everything we would never say. We cried for Grandma Rose. We cried for her sisters, Maria and Lucia and Angelina, and her brothers, Gennaro and Giacomo. We cried for 100 years back like the snap of fingers, to when little Rosa and Lucia got on the boat as teenagers and left. We cried for Annunziatine's mother, Maria, who was ready to get on the boat when World War I interrupted the plan and all of our lives were reversed. We cried for each other and the ocean that swelled in between us. We cried for the women, all the unspoken violations that paved women's lives, all the pain born in silence. We cried, a saltwater stream backward through time, all the way back, longer than time itself, our own saltwater contribution to the ocean of time that separated us. Our tears were greater than us. Life is a setup, death a mystery. Our hearts were naked like those pictures of Mary and Jesus, exposed hearts throbbing, ringed with thorns, hemorrhaging light, draped with roses, skewed with swords, topped with diadems. Mary and Jesus cried for us, pointing to their exposed hearts, outside of ribs, beyond sternums. What was it they were saying? Life hurts, bear your pain, walk with your heart open. I am with you. That's what I heard. I felt my own heart open. I watched my sister's heart open. Ribs got out of the way, sternums unzipped. Zia Annunziatine's heart opened. We cried for the lifetimes that separated us. We cried for things we couldn't name. We cried for the suffering. We cried for the century. We cried for the world wars, for post-war trauma and schisms. We cried for the hunger and desperation. We cried for the divorces. We cried for diseases. We cried for lonesomeness. We cried for our lack of understanding of ourselves and each other. We cried for the language barrier, for all that was lost, the knowledge of hands, the language of leaves and trees, olives and grapes, roots. We cried for our limitations. We cried for the people we had become, for our blind spots. We cried. We cried for births and deaths and miscarriages and stillbirths. We cried for souls who never arrived. We cried for what was never to be. We cried for violence and rage. We cried for everything each of us had suffered alone, depressions and addictions, cancers and PTSD, schizophrenia and manic depression, isolation and persistent poverty. We cried for the American dream and the desperate cries of those who went to New York for work to help the others survive, alone or with a sister, like little Rosina and Lucia, teenagers. We cried for those who left and for those who were left behind, and for those in our families who would never know one another. We shed sheets of cement off our hearts. The Bronx came off. The US came off. 100 years came off. English came off. The soil was tilled, turned over, opened. We cried for joy. We cried for all we survived. We cried for the miracle of making it to this momentous moment. The sorgente rose within us. The heart is an ocean opening. The heart is an ocean opening. The heart is an ocean opening. Thank you. That's on page 206 if you want to read it. Stan, why don't you come in? I need a break. We could talk and then I can read more.
Eccomi qua, Annie. Okay, so that was so beautiful. As our audience will see right away or hear right away, your prose is poetry. So that's the defining mark of all of your work. And as one person in the chat already pointed out, yes, those are Annie's books behind my shoulder on the bookshelf there, her other books. So Annie, let's begin with the title itself, about this idea of wind and what role the wind plays in Italian culture. There are Italians, as people in our audience know, who will organize their entire day depending upon like which one of the 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 winds is blowing that particular day, right? You know, whether it's the Scirocco, the Tramontana, or whatever, right? So, but what's really beautiful is that you mentioned early on that the first wind in your life was actually the memory of your mother's breath on your cheek. Do you want to talk about that? And the Italian word of spirare, which is almost like a onomatopoeia, you know, the thing that sounds like the very thing it is. The name of the thing sounds like the very thing it is. So do you want to talk about that?
Sure, yeah. I'm sure everyone can relate. Thank you for zooming in on that. And I'm going to read a passage about the wind. Doesn't everyone remember someone's breath on your cheek, a mother, a parent, a caregiver? I was sick as a lot as a kid, and my mother was close in proximity a lot to take my temperature, and but it's a very early sentient memory. Just her cheek on my forehead, taking my temperature, and just her breathing as she assessed my temperature. And then even in healthy times, being rocked to sleep, I just remember that feeling of her breath. And then quickly, I'm sure people identify with this, but, don't get a draft. Don't get a draft. My mother I still have a scarf on tonight, even though it's warm. Our necks are always wound with scarves. And, in Italy, it's a disease, right? The cervicale and the colpo di freddo, the attack of the wind. But, it's a spiritual, it's the spirit of the book, The Wind. And when I'm in the hometowns, when I'm trying to imagine what it was like 100 years ago when my grandmothers were little girls and my grandfathers, I always kind of, feel the wind and smell it, Yeah. sense it. And it's, I just imagine that's the part that hasn't changed. Like that's the same winds they felt. So it's a continuum,
So for those of you that haven't read the book, Annie travels through Naples, Campania, Puglia, and Sicily. And in each region, she asks, what do you call the wind in a different language or different dialect? And this idea of the wind, the effect of the wind on the body leads to another theme, which is the theme of the body, corporeality, right? And the precariousness of the body, of your body, of your mother's body, and Grace's body, right? Do you want to talk a little bit about that and how your own history of health played into this trip and what kind of impact it had on you?
Yeah, I got distracted. I don't understand the question, but I was distracted. Wait, let's get back to that. I just want to answer what's in the Q&A quick, all right? So Mike Fiorito, my Spalding is right here. It's in the hangar, so you could get it out of the sewer. So I'll answer that question. And there's a few other questions. Someone said, where has the wind appeared since you were writing about it? And recently, a friend of mine, Stan, gave me bucantini. So it's the long pasta with the hole in it. Joanna Claps Herman sent it to me. And I don't know how to eat it because when you eat bucantini, it's like spaghetti with a hole in it. So it has a tunnel. So I was trying to eat it tonight, but when I suck it in like spaghetti, the wind comes through the hole in the bucantini. And I honestly don't know how to eat this pasta. I don't have the technique. My Pugliese tongue is not ready for bucantini, which is more from a little bit north. But Stan, tell me a question, something about the body and health.
So, I was asking the question about the precariousness of our bodies and the bodies of people in your life, like your mother, and Grace, yourself.
There's a few, right, okay.
Even your father.
Yes, yes. And God bless them all, the book opens up with a couple of chapters dedicated to friends of mine that recently died just before I took this trip. And the voices of my dead friends, because I had cancer from a teenage. And so, like my father, when I was diagnosed at 18 with Hodgkin's lymphoma, my father sat at my bedside in Sloan Kettering. His name was Joseph Rocco Lanzillotto. And he fought in Okinawa with the US Marines in World War II. And he sat at my bedside, and basically his message was, I know what it's like to have teenagers die around you. And number one, he would say, the body is like a chicken. They cut you up like a chicken. Just give your body to the surgeons, let them cut you up and you'll be okay. And number two, drink water. He preached to me about water. And number three, don't stop. He said, when I was on the battlefield, I stopped next to my friend who was dead. And the sergeant whacked me with the butt of the rifle and said, keep going, soldier, or you'll be next. And those messages stayed with me. And the voices of all my friends who died when I was a teenager and then through life always urged me. It's like an inner wind tunnel, really. It's like a turbocharge in me. Go, travel, focus on your work. Don't waste time. And that's why the meat is next to me, because it truly is a meditation for me to make use of the hour. And even our prayer speaks of the hour, even the Hail Mary, the hour of death, amen. The hour is a sacred thing. And I just want to say hello to my cousins out there. Thanks for coming, everybody. Good. I'm reading all the comments.
Just to continue on this theme for a moment, Annie, there's this extraordinary juxtaposition in your book between this omnipresence of death, and the tragedies that befell your friends, your Aunt Grace, who says, this is life, we're born alone, we end up alone. And yet there are all of these life-affirming moments, whether it be through eating or through poetry or through friendship, or even the very name of your hometown, Acquaviva delle Fonti, the living waters of the spring, or the living waters of the source, and everywhere you turn, there's this kind of juxtaposition, like let's say the people in Pompeii, right? Or in other places that you go in Italy, and you see these constant, reiterations or reminders, memento mori, you have this beautiful poem about San Martino's Cristo Velato in Naples, right?
Well, you took me there.
This extraordinary juxtaposition of the living and the dead is another theme of the book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that was a deep experience. I mean, first, everyone in the audience should know how this book came about was I was minding my own business and I get an email from Stan and he says, do you want to come to this book festival in Napoli? And, you know, it was a dream come true to go with Stan because he knows everything about Naples. And I love how his mind works and what he pays attention to in his scholarship. And, but, you know, I didn't have the empowerment or money to go. I see some people in the audience help me go. Lynn Scove said, you got to go. What do you need? You got to go. And a lot of people even bought pieces of my mother's dirty floor to help me go, which is a story in the book. That's a good story. How did I sell the dirty floor from the 70s, the linoleum, to get to Naples? You know, Stan, just I want to mention, I want to put in a plug for philanthropy toward artists. Invite artists to do things. You know, I walk by all these empty storefronts and I think, let the artists in there to do something with them. You know, artists will make things. And this book wouldn't exist if Stan didn't write me an email and say, come with me to Naples. And, you know, I want to thank you because you utilized your invitation and your stature in the university community to bring artists with you. So that's, you know, thank you. And that's really quite something. And it elevates the field for everybody. I think there's a comment in the Q&A directed toward that. I think it says, Stan, did you expect, let me see. Let me just get at it.
The anonymous attendee said, was it your intention when you asked Annie to tour and read in Italy that more would come from that invitation? And how can the community work to support artists and engender additional opportunities? Well, this actually, the credit here has to go to Francesco Durante because he asked me to come up with two people. And my first thought went to you and Peter Covino, who has joined us. So he might put a question or a comment in the Q&A as well. It was extraordinary to be in Naples with the two of you and to walk along the streets because, you know, when you're with different people, you see different things, you experience things differently. But I want to ask you a question about another theme of the book, which is the imperative to communicate. The imperative to communicate across language, across space, across time, and your incredible ability to open up avenues of communication with people. They might be your relatives, or they might be like Ada that we met in Piazza Miraglia in Naples, you know, who was demonstrating for affordable housing, you know, and offered coffee or iced tea in exchange for solidarity. So do you want to talk about that, how you have this extraordinary openness to people and the ability to, you know, create a conversation and a relationship even within a few minutes?
Right. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'm a pluralist by nature and an interaction practitioner. You know, interaction is why I'm on Earth. And I think it's why we're all on Earth, isn't it? What are we here for? So, you know, and I think plurality in the demos, like the subway, was created for interaction, cross-class interaction, right? If those conversations could happen, that's the lifeblood of life. Yes, there's a story in the book that Stan referenced. I was walking alone in Naples and I saw in an alley this sign that I thought what it said. And there's a lot of, you know, let's say my American misperceptions of things I was seeing. But I thought it said, Aunt Ada will make you a coffee or tea if you promise her or pledge her your solidarity. So I said, wow, that's the best activist sign I ever saw in my life. And I brought Stan back to that sign and Jennifer Romanello. And I said, look at this sign. This is the best activist sign. And I've seen, right, as you all have, great ones in my life. You know, the AIDS movement was driven by brilliant signs and slogans. But this one took the cake. Aunt Ada will make you coffee or tea if you pledge yourself tarot. So with Stan and Jennifer there, as we were walking, and Stan, I want to know how you feel being a character in a book. Like, you just gave me an invite. Now you're a character in a book.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Well, you opened the door, but how does that feel? Like it's a big circle.
It was a new experience, to be sure. I didn't realize that Annie was so observant of my walking, because that's what you do in Naples. But this is another theme of the book, not so much walking, but falling. So, and not only falling, but in relationship to that, the search for the perfect bastone. So do you want to tell the audience something about that?
Sure. I kept falling down. So I got to Naples. I tripped 3 times on my face, like down, boom. I got a bad knee, whatever. But I walk fast like a New Yorker, and I'm used to flat cement and asphalt. But in the part of Naples, I was walking in the alleys. There's the Sanpietrini, these hand-carved basalt stones, like teeth. They're shaped like teeth, and they're hammered with these mazzapicchio hammers. They're hammered into the road. So the roads really do bend and breathe with the earth, and the rain is absorbed through the sand between these Sanpietrini stones. But my foot kept getting caught in between the stones. They're only about 5 inches. So if you get caught in between, you're down. And it took me a while to get my rhythm, and I realized I had to walk not only much slower, but with my foot kicking up and then landing down slow on the heel. And there was a moment in time where the foot, at the apex of the kick would just kind of, be still and then fall back to the earth and find the next stone, like heel toe. And when I was walking with Stan, I realized he had it down. Like he had it down. He's, Stan's a mezzo-Genoese gentleman.
Genetic memory.
Genetic memory. And, just to put it simple, I walk really different in New York, but when you're on that Sanpietrini, you got to slow it down. However, of course, there's expert women in high heels, and don't ask me how they do it in the rain when everything's slippery. But let me read some about the wind, and then we'll jump back in. And thanks, everyone. Keep the comments coming. I love it. I love it. And then we got to get Peter in here. So, Julian, when I'm done with this reading, bring in Peter Covino, please. Unmute him and let's see his beautiful face. All right. This came from a dream, and it's called The Wind Cellar. Cellar, as in somebody who sells wind. La Ventovendola. I'll read the paragraph that comes before. On Stefania's balcony, I didn't dream of being anywhere else. I didn't long for home. I didn't miss anywhere. I saw the almost full moon vanish. Lightning breached the sky over the Strait of Messina. The lighthouse pulsed every couple of seconds. A white cat ran across the top of the stone wall. Ancient stones, a cat, lightning, un momento di luce, a moment of light. The wildly brief, wet dance of my shirts in the wind. Swallows circling, le rondini girano, dogs barking through the night, their Sciroccazzo whipping the awning as I slept. The wind visited my dream. So now I'm selling wind to a sailor in my dream. You're here because the winds brought you here. The winds left you here. The winds will keep you here longer than you want. But when the next good wind comes, you'll be out of here and on your way. You're waiting for a good wind so you can leave. But what you need is the right progression of winds to bring you safely to your destination, to the harbors of your choice. Tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to offer you 3 winds. Tre venti. I got 3 good winds for you. So you could go anywhere you want to go, wherever you got to go, when you want to go, and safe arrival will be yours. Tenga 3 venti da 3 paesi, la tramontana, il Sciroccazzo, il maestrale, La forza cresce, il primo calma costate, il secondo più forte, in quale direzione che vuoi. Il terzo tumultuoso, una tempesta. Ma attenzione, questa tempesta non puoi controllarlo, senti, non puoi controllarlo. Sciroccazzo, Sciroccazzo, Sciroccazzo. Listen, without wind, you ain't going nowhere. I know. You got one ear on the horizon and you're itching to go. You're waiting for that one good wind, that once in a lifetime wind. She's going to come. You could feel it. The sky is gilded. She's coming to lift you. She's going your way. She'll bring you to the port of your dreams. Listen, I know winds. If there's one thing I know, it's the wind. I know winds like you know wines. You could think of me like a connoisseur of the wind. I can call all kinds of wind. I got zephyrs. I got Aquila. I got the black Lola. I got the Meltemi, Gregale. I got Scorchacrape. I got Gilbi. I got Favonio. I got the Hamsin. I got the Buriana. I got the Ponentino, the Waltzing Gin, the Borrasco, Chinooks. I got Zondas, Shams, the Warakushi, Il Maestrale, Il Scirocco, La Giana, a Haboob. Forget it. I got ancient winds. I got newborn winds. I got winds that trick you, and I got winds that got your back. I got a zephyr so sweet and calm, she'll caress you. She'll lower your heart right down. You could go to sleep and let the boat sail itself. I'm going to just cut it there. You could read it in the book, read the whole thing. But I want to keep the conversation going.
I have a couple of quotes too that I want to read, but I want to go to the Q&A. Kathleen McCormick asks, you talk about learning in Italy to live in the moment, but you give your readers that sense of immediacy only by moving seamlessly across many pasts into the present. How conscious were you when you started writing of maintaining that liminality between all of the pasts and the present as a way to keep your readers in the moment?
Wait, I need to hear that again. Kathleen Zamboni McCormick's too smart for me. Let me see. Read that again, slow.
About you, she says, you talk about learning in Italy to live in the moment.
Right.
But you give your readers that sense of immediacy only by moving seamlessly across many pasts.
Oh, I see.
To the present. How conscious were you when you started writing of maintaining that liminality between all of those pasts and the present as a way to keep your readers in the moment?
Oh boy, Kathleen, boy, oh boy. That's a dissertation question. Well, I just want to say, life, as disappointing and challenging and vicious as it can be, my only toolkit is to find joy and life in everyday moments, like the wind blowing my clothes on a clothesline in Messina, Sicily, or in Yonkers, New York, or in the Bronx, or wherever I am. Like a mouthful of home-cooked eggplant parmesan, like my grandmother sewing by the kitchen window, like giving a pedicure to my 95-year-old aunt. So I gave myself this challenge to try to find a moment of light every day. And then, how can I say, enjoying it. So that may take, stopping my thoughts or whatever, enjoying it. Now, but Kathleen's question was more about the narrative voice, right, Stan, not about the life.
Yeah, about this movement between the past and the present, this liminal space.
Right, let me give an example. So I'm walking in Naples and there's a street sign that says, Via di Santa Maria di Constantinople. And I said, oh my God, really? That means the street of the Madonna from Constantinople. So that brought me back thousands of years to this portrait supposedly painted by St. Luke of Mary a few years after Jesus died. And then that painting ended up in Turkey. And during the fall of Constantinople, when they threw all the Christian icons into the Sea of Marmara, this painting sailed through the seas, through the Bosporus Strait with the force of that water, into the Aegean Sea, up the heel of the boot, into the Adriatic, and it ended up at Acquaviva della Fonte in the church where my grandmother was baptized. So that's a moment, both in life and in the narration, where I'm thinking of thousands of years just by looking at a street sign, but I'm also in the moment of letting that street sign have meaning for me. And I think that's what I hope to achieve. Kathleen, we could talk more about it, but I think that's the best answer I could give right now.
One example of that is this extraordinary story that you tell about your mother's linoleum floor with the blue onion motifs, that you're going to redo the room. So you rip out the linoleum, and as you're throwing it out, you realize it's beautiful and it's a beautiful image. And you actually lug it back into your apartment and you cut it up into pieces and make it into art. It's sort of like the Neapolitan art of arrangiarsi, to make something out of nothing, to find a way to make things happen, So you were Neapolitan even before you stepped foot in Naples, Annie.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting way to be, to let things affect you deeply. I mean, it's hard to be like that in the world. It really is hard to be like that. But in other words, when I ripped up this linoleum from 1974, and now it was 2018, it was filthy, right? On the outside, the inside, the underneath side. But I dragged it back in the apartment and started cutting it up. So at that point, you need a mental health check. Am I in the middle of an art project, or, am I reliving some, ancestral trauma, or what's going on? But yeah, things affect me deeply, for better or worse. I'm looking at the chat.
Let me share with the audience some beautiful aphorisms or lines from the book, because they might generate more discussion. At one point on page 75, you said, "My Italian-American mind was wrong about so many things about life in Italy." Do you want to explain that a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
We in Italian America get wrong about Italy all the time.
Okay, well, listen, I'm a baby boomer, and my father was a veteran. During World War II, Italian, like Japanese, was the language of the enemy, like German. So the language was not passed on to us. All my grandparents told me, speak English, learn something new, don't look back. Go to California, learn something new. They did. My grandma Rose really wasn't indulgent of my interest in her life in the past, So what did we get wrong? So in other words, growing up, what do I know about Italy? It's really existed in a mist. And really, I didn't know anything about the lives of my cousins over there and how the towns had grown through time. Really, in my mind, it was kind of fossilized in 1919 or 1912, when my grandparents left as starving teenagers. And so I had to learn things one thing at a time. I had to learn the Ave Maria, this is a kicker, in Italian by myself. Because even though I went to Catholic school and experienced all the, tortures of Catholic school, I wasn't taught the Ave Maria in Italian. I was taught the Hail Mary in English. The Ave Maria, I've studied world religions. The Ave Maria, to me, is one of the most beautiful prayers and meditations in the whole world. Every Italian-American funeral, you're going to hear the Ave Maria, because when it comes down to it, no matter what you did in life, when you're dead, you want the Ave Maria sung over you. I do. I know I do. And we weren't even taught that in Italian. So what can I say? There was a schism, there was a break, there was a rupture in our culture through immigration. There was a rupture of the families. a rupture of memory, a rupture of the past being passed on to the next generations. And I was one of the kids that was interested in retrieving it, like many, and unlike, other many. So what else did we get wrong? So many things. I could make light of it, but I don't really want to make light of it. I'll tell you what we got wrong, and this is deep to me because, look, right now I have a third cancer, right? I have a third cancer. It's a blood cancer. No joke. Now, when I was 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, one of the fights I had with my Grandma Rose, when she was here at my mother's apartment, she would pick cicoria from the fields or off the side of the highway. It's a dandelion green, and she would boil it in pots on the stove. I thought it smelled like dirty socks. And I would run out of the house, I'd open the windows, I'd start screaming, she's doing it again, she's making everything smell. But you know what she said to me? You got to clean the blood. And I didn't know what the hell she was talking about. But now that I have a blood cancer, guess what? I got to clean the blood. So guess what I'm eating? That's what I'm eating, right? Cicoria, broccoli rabe, garlic. She told me this would clean the blood. And what a different way to live, not to fill your belly, but to clean your blood. Come on. Yeah. That's just a place to begin with this discussion. We could be here all night. Clean the blood. Who eats like that? Right. Put in the chat if you eat. I know there's good eaters here. There's, smart eaters, vegan eaters, whatever. Were you taught to clean your blood? I want to know. But
there's a beautiful, a more positive expression of this. At one point, you talk about being introduced to the Aperol Spritz, which is the cocktail du jour of Italy now, right, for the past several years. And you had this beautiful metaphor. You were amazed by the color of the Aperol Spritz. You called it sunset in a glass, and that by drinking the Spritz, you were literally drinking the sunset, the colors of the sunset. And I was thinking about this, how in Italy, I know it's a cliche, like the business of the food and how it's so extraordinary. But I was thinking we go to Italy to consume it, to be consumed, but what we consume there becomes literally part of our bodies, and it transforms us. It's almost a kind of like the sacred transformation, the transubstantiation of the Eucharist, it literally becomes part of our body. And I'll never drink an Aperol Spritz again without thinking of you and the idea of sunset in a glass. It's just extraordinarily, beautifully, achingly, beautifully poetic.
Well, that's, first of all, write that poem. I want to hear that poem. Second of all, Julian, let's bring in Peter Covino, because I had an Aperol Spritz with Peter Covino and in Salerno on the water. And
can you hear me?
Yeah, can we see you though? Can you undo your camera?
I can. I don't know.
I don't know if Julian promotes you.
Camera access. Hold on. Let's see.
Yeah, I don't know. Julian would have to promote you, I guess.
I would have to promote it.
All right, we'll see if he does that. Well, Peter, it was really profound. So Stan invited us to go to Naples, and Francesco organized. There he is. Hi, Peter. Francesco organized this book tour, and people got to understand Francesco. Stan, I don't know if you have the opus, the magnum opus, 800-page book behind you.
On the top shelf.
Yeah, we're going to show it. So Francesco edited this book of Italian-American authors. 800 pages. From what year to what year is that?
This was a collaborative effort between Bob Viscusi and other editors, Anthony Tamburi, James Pericone, and the English translation was published by Fordham University Press in 2014.
Right, but what year was the collection? On the cover, isn't there dates?
1880 to 1943, which is actually the second part of his original work in Italian.
What was the first part? What dates, do you know?
Much earlier, much earlier. I don't remember the Italian.
All right. So maybe it's fair to say Francesco paid attention to Italian-American writers from, let's say, the 1800s to 1940, whatever. And then me and Peter come along, right? He tours with me and Peter. Stan and Jennifer were with us for some of the tour. And then Peter and I continued. And Francesco takes us to Potenza and to Matera and Salerno. And we read poetry and were, we met the literati of these beautiful towns. And then a year later, Francesco dies. And I felt like me and Peter, two gay American poets, Italian-American poets, and Peter was born in Italy, were like cherries on the top of this hundreds of years of study, of work that Francesco did. That's how I felt in my imagination anyway. So Peter, we're going to be the cherries on top. That's how I think of it. And I hope we brought him joy. I think we did. I can't hear you, Peter.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Well, thank you for inviting me to talk and say a few things very last minute. I'm so honored, and I think about those moments every day. And Annie, congratulations on your book. And Stan, thank you for all of your support and love and hard work. Those blissful days, it is very mixed, right? I mean, to have had those moments and then to lose Francesco less than a year later, it seems so fleeting. And then we've all been in lockdown, right? I mean, not to mention people dealing with serious health issues. So I'm just so thrilled to be part of this launch, even unexpectedly so. And I just wanted to share one other little anecdote. This was an email poem that I wrote to Annie when she was working on her book. She asked me, was it all right to talk about anything that we experienced on the trip? And I said, of course it's all right. Feel what's right. And I remember her in her striped palazzo pants, and she had this big black band jacket that was so cool. It's one of like something that you would see like out of Ziggy Stardust or something like from the 60s. And it was really hot those days. And Francesco every day was like taking his jacket off and forgetting his jacket and wondering, could he borrow mine when he was about to present, because some of these places wanted us to have jackets. So I was like, of course, borrow my jacket here. But Annie's is much nicer. I don't know if that's the jacket you had on beneath the scarf.
No, it's just a shirt.
Oh, okay. But that jacket was memorable. I have pictures. So
you're the best dressed guy on earth. So I don't know what you're talking about.
And I just wanted to say, like, this last thing, like the day we were leaving, I left my jacket, which was this cheap Italian jacket at OVS. Like nobody in Italy would ever shop at OVS. Only people who like don't know fashion go to this place. But I loved it because it's cheap and you can get stuff. And I remember leaving my jacket for Francesco and saying, at least you can be with me for a few more minutes, as I was rushing off to catch the train. And then I never saw him again. So that's sort of how writing is and how memories are. You come back to them with one lost jacket or one beautiful gibbous moon and Annie's jacket. And I think it's valuable to write this down, to experience those moments that envelop us and keep us whole. So thank you, Annie. And I'm praying and crying for Annunziatina.
Well, thank you. And, I got to say, thank you, Peter. One profound moment was, again, being two gay poets is not insignificant, because we were reading at the monastery where St. Thomas Aquinas in the 12th century got his mystical vision that Christ on the cross spoke to him. And at that moment, Thomas Aquinas stopped writing. He said, I wrote enough. And he was dead a year later. And so Stan and Francesco have Peter and I reading in those rooms and alcoves. And I'm thinking, well, what can I bring to this? So I read a lesbian poem called Licking Batteries. And Francesco, who was a performer, and a rock and roller. He wanted to do the translations. He didn't want me stumbling through. So, I gave him this challenge to translate this poem, and just live in the moment. And what I learned was there's no good translation for Butch in Italian. And I held that question as I traveled around. The closest is things like camionista, like truck driver, or mollusk, or, derogatory words. So it was fascinating, to be honest, because Italian's got a great word for everything, right? But not quite. But there, Peter and I were, and I thought that was really profound, Peter. And, honestly, it was a privilege to be there with you. Very moving to me. And, right, I could have said, oh, Stan, thanks. I don't have the money, maybe next year. And that was it. Boom. It was over. Francesco gone, the pandemic here, 3 years go by, 4 years. So thank God we went. And thanks to everyone in the audience, like I said, Alin Scove, Audrey Kindred, everyone out there, Gabriella, Belfilio, everybody who pitched in so that I could go, made the miracle happen. All right, I'm going to look at the questions. And Stan, you had some ideas. You wanted to read some poetry or something?
Well, no, I wouldn't read the poetry. I said I would only.
Peter, thank you, Peter. I love you.
Yes, thank you, Peter. I just want to read one or two other lines, and then we'll turn more attention to the questions from the audience.
Just last thing, Lucia Mudd asks about, this is my painting of oranges. You could get it on my website. And I painted this book cover. I like to do still lifes because the moment stops. That's what a still life is, right? Everything stops. So, and my life has stopped many times, right? So that's where my consciousness is, in the moment. Okay, I'm listening to you, Stan.
So the third part of your trip was in Sicily, where you introduced yourself to the LGBTQ community, and you also met the people who were creating this map of Sicily of women and young girls who had died in the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. And this beautiful line, my map of Sicily is wounded, because you have this map of Sicily. Do you want to explain to the audience?
Yeah, so I had a map of Sicily that folded open like you would get at a gas station. And I'm trying to think how it started. I think how it started, I was sitting in a church at the top of a mountain in Sicily, and there was a ladder in the church. And of course, there was all gorgeous. The ceiling was gold. You can't even begin to describe the beauty. But the ladder made me cry. I just started crying. And I was like, why am I crying staring at a ladder? And I went up to the ladder. It was very particular. It was handmade. And it went all the way up into the apse of the church. Maybe it was, 5 stories, 6. It was very big. Maybe it was made out of cypress tree trunks. It was a really tall ladder. And it was just like tongue and groove, really old, handmade. And I said, that's the height of the ladder they needed at the Triangle Fire. Because when the fire broke out in 1911, in the village at the corner of Washington Place and Green Street, the ladders only reached to the 6th floor from the firemen, but the fire was on the 8th, 9th, and I guess 10th floor. So they needed that other 3 stories, 60 feet, or even 40 feet. From 6 to 8 so 40 feet would have saved how many lives? Maybe 100, who knows? Because the women started jumping out the windows to try to catch the ladder, but they were jumping 2-3 stories in the air. And So the ladder started making me cry. And then I remembered that this activist in Sicily, Esther Rizzo, was getting the names of the Triangle workers engraved on signs in their hometown. So she was getting streets named after them with this activist group called Toponimastica Femminile, which basically means you mark the names of women who died, right, in public. And And I met Esther, and I folded my map of Sicily out on her dining room table. And I said, I want you to mark all the places in Sicily where the girls were born. And she marked, I think there's 24 girls that were born in Sicily and died at the Triangle Fire. And so she circled the towns with a red marker and then underlined it with black. And now when I look at that map of Sicily, yeah, I saw wounds. So when you hold open that map, it had all these red spots. It looked pockmarked or like wounded. And ever since that moment, I don't see towns. I don't see Palermo, Noto, Messina. I see Francesca, Maria, Caterina, Rosina. I see those girls where they live. And as it turned out, one of the girls, Giuseppina, was from that town, that church where I was sitting with the ladder. And it's very possible that she saw that ladder and was baptized right next to it. So, there you go. That's that experience. I can't hear you, Stan.
I don't know what. Sorry. Okay. Audrey asked a question. You wrote, quote, "We are the keepers of the story now. And I see your book as a tool for making the ancestors available to the descendants. Will you read part of this book to youth and teach them to take on this challenge?"
Thanks, Audrey. Part of the happiest moments in my life when I was teaching 5th grade, and Audrey taught with me for many years, teaching as a poet in the schools. But I kept getting sick because I'm immunocompromised. So I guess the question would be, Audrey, yeah, I could write children's books. I don't think I'm not going in the classroom, with my body, but I guess my writing could go, I don't know. We could talk about it. It's a sad thing to not be able to go into the classrooms. I need like an outdoor, I need the amphitheatro. I need an outdoor space to teach and perform. Stan, unmute. I can't hear you.
Just looking through some of the other questions here. Mike Fiorito said, the format of the book is completely unique. Did you have any inspirations which gave you a jump-off point?
No, it's just how my mind worked, I think. I just felt, and listen, I have to thank Bordighera Press. They have a call every year where they say, send us 20 pages. If we like it, we'll ask to see the whole book. So I sent them 20 pages, and I got an email from Nicholas Grosso, who ended up laying out the book. And, he worked with me to create the book. As a book, he laid it out and helped me every step of the way. So big thanks to him. And I felt the freedom, because it is a small press, to make the book that my mind could make. I didn't have, let's say, commercial constraints. So I need to thank Anthony Tamburi, Fred Gardafe, and Paolo Giordano, who founded the press. And it's very profound, because this book is like number 159 or 160 on their list. The first book was written by Bob Viscusi. It was an oration about Christopher Columbus. And how would you say it? Sacrilegious oration, maybe something like that. And I had Bob, I invited him after he wrote it, that's about 25 years ago, to come to the Bronx and to read it on a street corner outside Our Lady of Mount Carmel on 187th Street. I set up a microphone, had a long orange extension cord, put it through the church window where the priest could plug it in, and Bob ranted and raved on the street. And my mother called him the crazy professor after that. So that was the first book in the Bordighera series, and this book is 159. And that's a lineage to me. That's a mountain of work and authors that Bordighera has supported and given a home to. You know, it's really, truly a community. So someone asked for my website and maybe where to get the book. So I guess I'll just put it, I don't know, I'll just type it there somewhere.
So someone asked for your website. It's just simply lanzillotto.com, where you can find her books,
Right.
and you can find her artwork, some of which is hanging in my house. So, yes.
So I'm just going to put it under Kay's comment because that's what seems to be where I could do it. Thank you, Kay. Love you. Wish we were eating pie in the South together. There's the website. And Stan, Annie Hawk Lawson wants to know the title of Francesco's book. If you could type it in the chat or just tell me and I'll type it quick.
It's simply Italo-Americana, the literature of the Great Migration. You can find it on Fordham University Press's website.
The literature of the Great Migration.
This is extraordinary work because Francesco spent 2 or maybe 3 decades traveling all over the United States, tracking down these works of literature, poems, essays, all kinds of writings. And it is an extraordinary history of Italian America. And with these very, very fruitful and important introductions to each section. So that's very, very important for us as historians,
Yeah, I tried to type it, but Annie, if you don't see it, Stan, hold it up. Maybe Annie could take a screenshot. Yeah, come a little closer. Italo-Americana. All right, see if you can screenshot it or call me afterwards. Thank you. And again, yeah, it's hundreds of years of work.
Yeah.
Crystal Cital asked the question, and I want to shout out all the authors in the audience. Crystal Cital wrote a phenomenal book, The Secrets We Kept, about 3 generations and a lot of domestic violence, finely wrought like lacework, intergenerational memoir. Alvin Eng just came out with a fantastic memoir about growing up in Chinatown, in Queens, in a Chinese laundry. It's fantastic, out of Fordham University Press. So look for Alvin Eng, E-N-G. I really enjoyed that book. And it's about punk rock.
So
Alvin's an old punker.
I would like to read just a small excerpt. So to set this up, Annie is in Puglia to go to the ancestral hometowns of her grandparents. And she's adamant that almost everybody she sees on the street is a cousin of hers. And she actually challenges them, like, I'll pay for a coffee for you if you can prove to me that you're not one of my cousins. Ma certamente siamo cugini, right? So once I met the cousins, I realized I was in the present, a whole different present. It was an immigration of consciousness. At the same time, I held the opposite feeling inside myself, that bloodline is the last thing that matters in life. What truly matters are the spirit bonds of common purpose, the rarest connection that has to do with recognizing we are alive in the moment and only briefly and walking one tightrope. What is worth dedicating our life force to you? So again, this extraordinary tension between, the idea of family, the tyranny of family, and yet the realization that the greatest relationships that we might have will be outside of the family.
Thank you, Stan. I'm going to read a poem or two. We have time. This is called Wild Caught, and it really brings up, I guess, my activist, inner nature. Wild Caught. I can't eat fish with all those people lost at sea. Nets of Sicilian fishermen haul dead bodies out of the sea up into light, or roll bodies back under wave swell to avoid red tape interrogation, impounding boats. Who can afford not to fish? Nets are still mended by hand. Live cod, live squid, fresh, live shrimp, live swordfish, nasello, sardinia, sogliola, cefalo, cernia, vongola, spada, scombro, alice, mazzancole, orrata, vongola, ombrina, tolo rosso, spigola, spigola, popo, triglia, pagello, live, fresh, tuna, live bass, dead human, whole and in parts, from Libya, Syria, and sub-Saharan points. The world is worse than anyone imagines. The sea more vast, and fishermen are now fishers of people. Back some go to anonymity. No one will ever know what became of them. Those who fled shores in desperation for a better life. In questi tempi, when fish eat flesh, and the catch of the day on the tourist menu boasts catturati in mare aperto, caught in the open sea. Pesce selvaggio, wild caught. You know, there's a theme in the book about not wanting to go to Italy to sit on the beach and look at the water. And people saying to me, go to the beach, go to the sea, vai al mare, vai al mare. And me being like, no, that's not what I'm here to do. And, you know, in a sense, this started, I would say many years ago, the quest for self-knowledge and knowledge of my history and culture. I was a fellow of the Rockefeller Foundation in a very diverse group of what they called next generation leaders. So it was people from all sectors who vehemently disagreed with each other, who really had polar opposite views of politics, of life, of, you know, every issue of the day. And it was said by one of the fellows, Timothea Howard, who was an organizer in Washington, D.C., she said, you know, we're not supposed to be in the same room together. We're not supposed to be having these conversations. She meant, of course, the opposite, you know. And there we were. And I was challenged just by being white and Italian. I was challenged on Justice Scalia and his policies. I was challenged on Berlusconi and his policies. I was challenged on Columbus and, you know, what he is in today's world. And I was challenged on by, let's just say, this diverse group. So there were tribal leaders from different tribes in the Southwest. I was, and meanwhile, on Columbus Day, this is Columbus Day-ish, right? Today, yesterday, whatever. Ambulances would line up because between the tribal councils and the protests of Columbus Day in Denver, blood would be shed between the Italian-American community and activists who wanted this holiday relooked at, gotten rid of, renamed, and Italians who, you know, wanted the opposite. They wanted to say, listen, my father was a shoemaker, and his pennies went to create the statue, and that's why we're here today. And so I was challenged because I didn't know my history. And my part of the discussion, let's say on diversity, on race in America, my part of the discussion, I couldn't have a voice unless I knew my Southern Italian history. And, you know, in 1865, when slavery was in this country, where were my ancestors? Did they have food to eat? Where were they? What were they doing? I needed to know. So I didn't go to Italy to sit on the beach. And people maybe didn't like my answer when they said, go to the beach, you know, go to the beach. I wanted to go to the cemetery. I wanted to learn. I wanted to hear stories. I wanted to learn language at my pace. I wanted to make mistakes. And today, I would say my message tonight is we need the freedom to make mistakes. We need to give each other the freedom to make mistakes, to say the wrong thing, to let it come off the tongue the wrong way. That's the only way I learned in life about anti-Semitism, about racial awareness, by saying the wrong thing that I learned as a child and by being corrected by a diverse group of friends. If I wasn't allowed to make mistakes, if people just cut me off because I said the wrong thing, I would have never had a conversation from the time I was 5 years old. Never. When I was 3 years old, I had a babysitter for one night. Now, my parents never went out. So why would I even have a babysitter? I had no babysitter. If there was a family event, they took the kids. If there was a wedding, the kids went. We were never excluded. Maybe they had a funeral to go to. It's possible. And my mother might have said, I don't want to bring her. She's only 3 years old. That's possible. That was one of the fights they used to have. My father would want me included at the funerals, and my mother would say, she's not old enough. So at 3, I found myself for the first time alone with a babysitter, a neighbor who I loved, a teenage girl. And we were sitting on the couch having fun. We were having a great time. And because I was so happy, I smacked her across the face. Whack! Red. And she was infuriated. And I was confused. I said, what? I love you. Well, what are you mad at me for? I think that was my first mistake in life. And she had to teach me that's not what people who love each other do. But that's what I saw as a kid. That's what I experienced as a kid, and that's what I saw. That's what I witnessed. That's what people who loved each other did, both violently and affectionately. If you didn't get a smack on the cheek, one of these even, come si bella, how beautiful you are, whack. I mean, when I was a kid going to weddings, I got smacked 100 times affectionately. But in the house, I grew up in a violent house. My father had trauma from the war. And war trauma is violent, and it plays out in the kitchen. And I was a baby boomer. Boom. So my message tonight is give yourself the room to make mistakes in your speech, in how you see the world, and give each other the room, because our society in this moment is not tolerant of mistakes. It's not tolerant of mistakes of speech, and we need that tolerance. We need to learn. How are we going to learn? So everyone has to say, I have the right to make mistakes. That's the best way to learn in my life.
So I while you were saying this, I just pulled off Gay Talese's memoir, Unto the Suns, from the bookshelf behind me. And those of you that know it know how it ends, a very beautiful, powerful, poignant end where the father ends up saying, cradling his son, who has just smashed through a plate glass window after they have had this big, huge fight. And the father keeps saying over and over to his son, in Italian, those who love you make you cry, right? But more to what you were saying, towards the end of the book on page 235, you have this line, I had to learn my culture and history one shock at a time. It's something I think Italian-American community might learn from, because we sort of like refuse to be shocked. We don't want to really engage with the darker aspects of our history, either collective history or personal history, right?
Yeah, and how are we going to learn? I see Maria Aponte, an author, poet in the audience. Hi, Maria. And her and her husband, Bobby, run the Bronx festivals, Native American festivals in the park. And how am I going to learn? Like, us Italians have to be in conversation. How am I going to learn, Native American history? How am I going to learn? How am I going to learn what projections are upon me in society because I have a vowel at the end of my name and because I have a Bronx accent? How am I going to learn? But it saddens me that there's no tolerance for mistakes. It really, really does. Because we have to talk to each other. You can't just talk to people you agree with. What fun is that? We started this conversation talking about interaction, right, Stan? And, so, all right, I think that's good for tonight, unless someone's got a burning question.
I'm going to put the last line of the book
Okay.
the Q&A, because it's an aphorism that is like so beautiful, I think. So did it go? I'm not sure.
Okay, read it. What is it?
So the last, it's just like a beautiful line. The last page of the book: I will make art until I die, and then I will paint the sky.
Thanks, Stan. And yeah, well, I do believe that, you know, I do. I believe every sunset is, I guess, what do you call someone who believes in nature? Like rocks and trees. And what is it?
An animist.
And all right, I'm an animist, I guess. But also the line before that is, what position do you want to be in for l'eternità, for eternity? What position do you want to be in for eternity? Because Stan took me through Pompeii, and he's a scholar who knows a lot about Pompeii, that's for sure. And, you know, the bodies that are still being uncovered, everyone's very, you know, twisted, tortured. And I said, you know, to myself, and particularly the pandemic came, and I was equating in my mind Pompeii to the pandemic, to this, you know, massive death that descends on the world. What position? So, you know, there wasn't one person dancing in Pompeii saying, like, come to me, volcano, you know, here I am, come. There's not one body that's like outstretched arms. And the worst of all is this little dog that's chained. And there's a poem dedicated to that little dog in the book. And he's twisted up. He was tortured by the lava. So what position do you want to be in for eternity? And what does that mean? Can we embrace what comes? You know, that's a question I have.
So, Annie, thank you so much for this very powerful work: poetry, memoir, history, culture, travelogue. It's really extraordinary. I urge everyone to get a copy, more than one. Give them out as gifts, because it's a beautiful work. And visit her website, because she has her artwork there. These are pieces that, if you have them around you in your home, they bring an extraordinary sense of vitality and beauty to your everyday life. So I'd like to thank Stefano and the staff of the Casa Italiana, and I'm going to leave the last word to Annie.
Well, yeah, I want to thank Stefano Albertini and Julian and Julia, you know, doing everything behind the scenes. You know, Julian, thank you so much. You guys launched my last book a couple of years back, and now this one tonight, and I really appreciate the support and the love. And the book you could get anywhere. There is a special link at I Am Books Boston online, and they're a bookstore I like to support. They make space for Italian American literature, and they were gracious enough to make a webpage for the book. So you could go to iambooks. I guess it's com or org. I guess com, or anywhere. And also, if you get a local nickname of the wind, wherever you live or whatever culture you are, send it to me. I'm collecting them. Local nicknames for the wind. All right. And let's just do a last call. Is there anyone who's got a question or a comment that you want to make? Let's just look one more time. It's the top of the hour, but we'll look one more time. Lynn Scove says, someone who believes in nature is a spiritualist. Okay, I like that. All right. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate you taking this hour to be together. And yeah, it's ancient, but know your history. You know, look into it. Look into it, and know the ancestors. And yeah, give each other room to make mistakes. That's really what's on my heart today. And Carol Lambert, thank you, painter in Alaska. Thanks for being here, everybody. All right, I love you all, and we'll be in touch. Okay. All right, Stan, thank you so much for making time tonight and for changing my life with the invite to go to Naples.
Very happy.
All right, stay well, make mistakes. Love you all. See you next time. The next event is November 3rd through I Am Books. I'm doing a reading with Marianne. Marianne Leone. We're going to split a night at I Am Books online. You could get a reservation now. You know, it's free, but with these things, you got to reserve. All right, make mistakes. Thanks, everybody. See you out in the world, I hope.